much high on the agenda. Yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa, as you saw, they joined discussions on reviving the global economy.
An African leader, the South African president, he used the opportunity to canvass support for the proposal on waiving intellectual property on COVID-19 products. He was the only African leader invited to this year's summit. On climate change, the president is expected to raise the issue of developed nations supporting their adaptation and mitigation efforts in the global south. This includes financial aid and the transfer of technology and knowledge. Sophie Mokoena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, let's bring in our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena. She's been monitoring talks there at the G7 summit. Sophie, thank you very much indeed for coming on. So South Africa, as we know, has been invited for one part for its role as co-chair of the ACT Accelerator Facilitation Council, which, you know, for the benefit of the viewers, aims to expedite research and manufacturing and equitable distribution of vaccine diagnostics as well as therapeutics across the world. What sort of impact is President Ramaphosa making at the G7 summit?
I think perhaps we should start by sharing information with the viewers that the G7 has always invited South Africa to be part of the guests who attend the G7 summit. In the days of the G8, President Thabo Mbeki used to attend the G8 meetings. The intention here is to have perhaps a voice and input from an African country. And they have always identified South Africa as a gateway to Africa. And therefore, the South African president gets invited to this meeting. Now, President Ramaphosa has been invited as the president of South Africa, but with the hope that he will also share the views of the leaders on the continent. He is currently the chair of the African Union on the climate change. That is why on Wednesday, he invited heads of state in that committee to get input that he was going to share with the G7 leaders when the issue of climate change was being discussed. But also South Africa played a prominent role in ensuring that we have what we call a Paris climate agreement. South Africa was at the forefront pushing for that agreement. And now he is there again. He is going to share information in terms of what Africa and South Africa is doing to address the issue of COVID-19. And as you have pointed out, he is co-chair of the ACT Accelerator that has come up with COVAX facility, the facility that is aimed at assisting developing countries around the world to have access to vaccines. Two, on the continent requested him to continue with the work on COVID-19 when the current chair, the president of the DRC, Phyllis Tshisekedi, took over from him after he served as the chair of the AU last year until this year. Therefore, the intention here is to get the African voice, but also to hear what South Africa is saying, as it has been a tradition post-1994, particularly from the administration of former President Thabo Mbeki. And this afternoon, he is going to participate in this climate change meeting, where he is going to put forward the voice of the African country, but also the voice of African countries, including perhaps the developing nations, because there is an argument within the discussions on climate change that as you adopt mitigating factors on climate change, you must not perhaps get unintended consequences in terms of the economic growth of these developing countries. The G7, the industrialized countries, the main polluters, they have money, they are rich, they can embark on an aggressive program to address climate change. But the developing nations, they still have to develop their economies. For example, the issue of coal is very critical. So how do you do away with coal, but you don't disrupt the economic activities in these developing nations? For an example, South Africa still relies on coal in terms of production of energy or electricity. So you can't wake up tomorrow and say, we are completely not going to use coal. But those rich countries can afford that because they have developed the infrastructure in terms of manufacturing of energy and electricity. They are way ahead in terms of clean energy. But what about the developing nations? So that is why the role of South Africa or an African country is important and supported by India. It will be even more important. Yesterday it was around COVID-19. He was able to push or to present a position of India and South Africa on TRIPS waiver on all products that are addressing COVID-19. And India participated as well. Therefore, these two countries, I can say, in these deliberations and on the margins or the sideline of G7, they are pushing interests of their respective countries, but generally their respective regions and automatically the interest of the developing nations.
Look, it's no doubt an important club, this, but one wonders in terms of substance as opposed to just being a talk shop. I heard French President yesterday, Emmanuel Macron, saying that when he was discussing with Joe Biden, US President, that Mr. Biden is now part of the club. I think it was probably a jab at the former President Donald Trump. But do you think South Africa, in particular President Cyril Ramaphosa, values being invited to a meeting such as this in terms of getting things done, as opposed to it being just a talk shop?
Well, these meetings, indeed, sometimes they tend to talk shops. But the reality is, South Africa is part of the international community. Africa is part of the globe. And therefore, you have to continue to push and make your voice heard as a country, a developing country, or representing developing nations, but also representing the sub-Sahara, the poorest region in the world. But because if you don't go and talk about your own plight and, telling these leaders that you can't always dictate for us, this is how we want things to be done, how will you achieve that? Secondly, the issue of the fear by the West in terms of influence of China. You have to go there and also push back or explain your relationship with China. Not that you owe them explanation, but you have to engage. Because when you look at the body language of President Biden and what he has been there for mainly is to reset or to re-entrench the role of the United States of America as the global leader and repositioning itself in this group and its voice being dominant. And he is using that as well to deal with his enemies, that is the U.S., not an individual person. China is targeted because his fears are that China is becoming so influential in developing countries. And it is because the previous president, Donald Trump, was inward looking. He didn't care what was happening around him. But the reality is you cannot be an island as a country because on issues of trade and investment, you will always have to interact and you have to fight for your own country or the interest of your own country. So America still wants to dominate. And that is why the president of France was saying, welcome to the club, because this is a club of influential people, perhaps we can say people who share the same views in terms of trade and investment and the politics or the geopolitics. Therefore, they are welcoming him because the previous president, Donald Trump, didn't really care. Who can forget that picture where Trump is sitting surrounded by these leaders, almost like a little baby crying, and now adults are trying to persuade him, And I used to make a joke to say, hey, it's like President Donald Trump is crying for a sweet. Those were the pictures. That's how problematic the United States of America was within the G7. And now they are feeling a better atmosphere. That is why the Prime Minister of Britain spoke about fresh air. And I think the same environment is going to prevail during the G20. Even at the G20, South Africa is the only African country who is part of the G20. And in that group also, when South Africa is at the G20, they have to push for the interest of South Africa, but also the interest of the continent and the interest of developing nations. And this tradition started during Mbeki's era also. So South Africa has been there. South Africa has been viewed as an influential voice or a player at global matters. We are involved in lots of peacekeeping missions on the continent, working with the United Nations. So in these multilateral forums, plus these groups, South Africa always gets invited.
The G20 rather, Sophie, leadership summit is coming up in Italy in October, if I'm not mistaken. I want to just talk, just as we wrap up, with regards to the issue of China and the debate that's currently going on at the G7 and the best approach to take towards China. Joe Biden is going to meet with the Russian President Vladimir Putin soon. Having President Cyril Ramaphosa coming there as an invited guest, does he weigh in on issues of Russia and China as part of the BRICS nation, or is this not part of the purview?
When they discuss issues that are related to peace and security, clearly South Africa's position will be clear, South-South. And therefore, South Africa will always also take a position of friendly relations with China and with Russia, because they are together in the BRICS nation. But the long-standing relationship that dates back to exile years, South African liberation organizations, having relationship with the Communist Party of China, relationship with Russia. And therefore, not only Russia and China, the issue of the Middle East, South Africa will always take a side in the interest of the Palestinians and the liberation of the Palestinians. Therefore, when you come to the geopolitics, South Africa will always stand with South-South and the former friends, and fight for the oppressed or the marginalized. That is why I think President Ramaphosa's meeting with Joe Biden, which was a first meeting with an African head of state, I am sure the issue of Middle East did come in. And I am sure President Ramaphosa made it clear that South Africa's position is that you need a two-state solution. And indeed, you need to support the liberation, the fight for liberation of the Palestinian people. And on the issues of Russia, again, he will take a very balanced view, because South Africa has got strong relations with Russia. So the meeting with President Putin, yes, President Putin and President Biden will have to resolve their issues, America and the U.S. You saw President Putin granted a big broadcaster in America interview a day ago or on Friday. The intention was to set the record straight where his views are, and also how he's approaching this meeting with President Biden that is going to take place in Switzerland next week. So the two leaders will meet. We've been told that they are not going to have a joint press conference, which speaks to how they really still have to resolve their issues, because currently the relationship is not sound, or one can say is a bit frosty.
It was reported that he said that the relationship, that is Putin, said the relationship with the United States is at its lowest point in years. So that meeting in Geneva is definitely going to be very interesting. Sophie Mokoena, our foreign editor, as always, thank you.